Thanks a bunch, and thanks to you and to Jessica for the invite, by all means. I appreciate it just come down. So it's actually been a while since I've been here in this county. It's been, I don't remember, to be frank with you, but this happens every year. This is my first trip to West Kentucky after the time change, all right? All right, you know where I'm going, right? I hate daylight wasting time, and I really don't like winter, but I crossed into Union County I looked down, it was 4:57, and it was within 20 minutes of dark. So I told my wife, I said, we can't complain anymore. It could be worse. So anyway, good to be here. So here's what I thought I'd do. I'm going to talk a little bit about general market and cattle prices and so forth, give you some kind of forecast type things. And I think by doing that, I'll talk through some things that drive cattle prices. But really where I want to focus a lot of the discussion is on just kind of three areas. First of all, some just common value-added opportunities for cattle. Start there. I want to talk about factors that drive and impact cattle prices specifically. We'll talk about market-type things and then individual characteristics. And then talk about some risk management tools. So that's kind of going to be my plan. So a general overview, if you will, of cattle marketing concepts is kind of where I'm heading. I like to start out showing just a couple things, and the first thing I always like to show is just this retail price comparison between beef, pork, and chicken. And I just like to make the point that there's a reason why beef is oftentimes vulnerable to substitution in challenging economic times, because inch per inch, pound per pound, it's by far the most expensive meat that Americans eat in any volume. Okay, now got a lot of attention in the last couple of years. In reality, beef prices have flattened off and are actually starting to come down a little bit at the retail level. If you look at our main competitors, though, both pork and poultry, especially pork, are still creeping up. And I think we're going to probably see that maybe often change a bit the next 12 months or so. What I'm showing you now is just basic production forecast. So this is ERS production forecast. The first column here compares 2022 to last year, okay? Your right compares 2023 forecast to what's likely to be the case for 2022. And I want to start at the bottom and kind of work up. The first point I want to make is this is a fairly flat production level for broilers, okay? This is a sector that's kind of built around designing or producing a fairly low, inexpensive source of protein, okay? So 2 to 3% increase a year is pretty common for broilers. So the fact that we're around 1.5 is actually fairly low. We're going to see pork production about flat next year. The real story, though, is right here. And the reason I've got a star by my beef forecast for 2023 is I did not buy ERS's number, frankly. So 5% is my number. But the thing to understand is that's so unusual right now is we've got a smaller cow herd this year compared to last year, and we're going to produce more beef. How do you do that? You pull cattle forward and you kill cows, okay? We've killed a lot of cows this year nationwide. Because of that, because of the fact that we're going to have fewer cattle on feed, smaller calf crop, and I don't know exactly in terms of some other things, the feed prices, whatnot, we're going to see a sizable decrease in beef production next year, okay? And I think going forward, that's going to be the most important thing to know is that from a supply perspective, this beef market looks a whole lot tighter in 2023 than it has the last 2 or 3 years, which should bode well for prices.
Is that going to keep the price low in 2 years from now?
I think you'll see it next year. I do. I would be very surprised if 2023 wasn't a much better cattle market than 2022. Very surprised. Other questions? Okay.
What was the ERS projection?
They had it down, I can't remember, Chris, I want to say 7 or 8%. And so, difference of opinion. The only way I could get us at that big a drop next year was if I assumed a lot of heifer retention. And I just don't think there's enough pasture availability, particularly in the southern plains, to hold back enough heifers to start expansion that quickly. So Yeah, that's where
They're still dry, right?
yeah, very dry. So anyway, dry here too, right? I complain about summer drought all the time. I think fall's worse. I really do. Yeah, I just you don't realize how much you depend on fall pasture growth till you don't have it. And the other thing is, as frustrating as summer droughts are, the opportunity cost, right? The growth you're not getting in the summer on the cool season forages, from my perspective, is so much less than in the fall. But when it's dry, September, October, we feed a lot more hay in the winter, personally. So anyway, I'll take a summer drought next year, please, Chris. All right. Fall was brutal. We were in great shape until mid-late August at home. It didn't get dry until the end of August. Anyway, I'm complaining now. The cattle market, to me, has had several false starts. And by that I mean there's been about 3 or 4 times I said, okay, we're finally there. All right. The first one really would have been early in 2020, right? That should have been the year we started to finally see the benefit from a smaller cow herd. Okay, COVID took care of that. We saw grain price double from summer of 2020 to summer of 2021 and grow up again in 2022. War in the Ukraine, dry weather. There's been something really over the past 3 years. It's basically rain on a feeder cattle parade. So we've just had several times I've seen the market kind of start to take off. This summer I thought we were there, and it didn't occur either. So several false starts. The impact of the drought that we're dealing with right now is huge. I'll show you a map in a minute, but something like 80% of the U.S. as of last week was in at least some sort of abnormally dry or drought condition. If you look at where the bulk of the cattle are, I think it's probably more like 90%. So major implications on the weather side. Feed prices are a challenge, obviously. They're doing a lot of things, but one thing they're doing in the short run is they're kind of amplifying seasonal patterns, right? What time of year is our calf market typically the strongest? Typically spring, okay? When I've got grass demand for stocker cattle. It's usually lowest as I kind of move out of the grazing period. So normally that's about November, sometime late fall. When feed price is higher, though, what it does, there's not as much impact on calf prices in the spring, right? But we see even more in the fall. So what it tends to do is it tends to widen that differential between spring calf prices and fall calf prices. Does that make sense? Okay, so if that's normally 15 cents, it's probably more like 25 cents in a year like this or so. So it just amplifies those differences. But the good news is our cow herds are getting smaller and so are our calf crops. So much like the discussion about beef production next year, the same can be said about the size of this cow herd. The fundamentals look pretty good. Talk about fed cattle prices. So this is slaughter cattle out west at the knife. Okay, dotted lines last year. We started 2021 trading fat cattle a little over $1.10 a pound. Okay, follow that dotted line through 2022. This is the last data point I've got. This would have been, I guess, the end of October. Okay, and you can see, folks, we've added about 40 cents a pound. Okay, to fed cattle price. So 1,300 pound steer, you can do the math. That's about $500 or so a head. Pretty impressive difference. We're kind of starting to trickle back as we speak. This didn't get enough attention, I don't think, last year. We set a record for beef exports in 2021. I think we're going to break that record in 2022. If you look at where a lot of beef is going, the only reason why I would have guessed back in the summer that we wouldn't break this record again this year was simply because I thought production had to come down in the second half of 2022. But we've just kept pulling cattle forward in the beef system, kept killing more cows. Big driver has been what's been going into the Chinese export market. We resumed trading with China in, I believe it was October of 2019, and I could be wrong about that, but I think that was when it resumed. And at the time, I told a lot of groups like this that we exported about 1 to 0.2% of our beef production to China. It was just a drop in a bucket, almost insignificant. That's a growth market though. 2022, they're going to be our third largest export destination, behind only Japan and South Korea. And they're a major reason why we've seen beef exports increase the last couple of years, and again, certainly in 2022.
Is that all cuts of beef or just high-end cuts?
It's a lot of high-end stuff, but it's some of everything. Remember this about the Chinese market. It's a massive market, okay? So it's easy to look at something like this and say, okay, we're moving, I don't know what it is, 60 to 80 pounds, or 60 to 80 million pounds a month there. That's still just a fraction of the Chinese market, just a drop in a bucket of the Chinese market, right? So as you can imagine, that tends to be a major pork-consuming nation. Beef's more expensive, okay? So what types of consumers in China are consuming beef? It tends to be the more affluent ones, right? But the good news long run is, as those incomes increase, and they'll continue to do so, right, they're going to add more higher value protein to their diets. So that's definitely a growth area going forward. But short answer is it's tended to be more upper end cuts thus far. Anything else? All right. This has been the story though, really. And now, so drought monitors come out, their data is basically on a Tuesday, they come out on a Thursday. Okay, so 2 days from now, the next one will come out, there's basically data from today. So this does not include Hurricane Nicole impact, right? But the point that I want to make here is just how much of the country is dealing with dry weather. Okay, now, what's the largest cow-calf state in the country? Texas, and Texas hands down, right? 4.6 million beef cows in Texas. So whatever it works out to be, that's probably, 15% of the U.S. cow or something like that, okay? So whenever you see dry weather in the southern plains, you want to pay attention, okay? That's our biggest pocket of cattle. Next biggest pocket's northern plains, and then southeast would kind of be number 3, okay? Been a long time since I saw major drought in all 3 of those areas. So again, remember that. It's been the perfect storm for herd liquidation, okay? Really, we've had several frustrating years back-to-back of calf prices. Okay, there's strike one, okay? Secondly, we've got dry weather in a lot of cow country. Now, in all fairness, the drought in the southeast really got a whole lot worse after summer. Okay, it was bad dry in the southern plains though, pretty much all year long. Okay, going back to fall of 2021. So we've had dry weather in major cattle producing areas, and then top that off with high cull cow prices. Right, that was the only saving grace in some cases was when folks had to liquidate cows. The cow market's been fairly strong and still is historically strong right now, although it's down some. So that's a recipe for cow slaughter. Dotted lines 2021, blue lines 2022. You know, you don't need me to tell you this, but we've killed a lot more cows this year than last year. What time of year do we tend to sell most of our cull cows in the U.S.? Typically fall, right? We tend to calve in the spring, wean calves in the fall, sell cull cows at the same time. All right? Now, anytime I have a year like this when it's been dry, throughout spring and summer, I kind of start to ask myself, okay, am I going to see less culling in the fall because we had to cull harder in the spring and summer? Does that make sense? So far, though, there's no indication that we're going to see any pullback in cow slaughter in the fourth quarter. So, like I said, this goes through the 4th week in October. So you can kind of see how we've been running. In terms of beef cow numbers, we came into 2022 with a cow herd that was about 1.5 million cows fewer than we had in 2019. So over that 3-year period, from Jan 1, 2019 to Jan 1, 2022, we lost about 1.5 million cows nationwide. I think we're going to lose something like another 800,000 this year. Just simply looking at the first 10 months, okay, so through October of this year versus last year, we've killed 370,000 more cows in 2021. About how big is the U.S. cow herd? Anybody know? That would include dairy cows, I think. Beef cow herd about 29 million. Okay, so kind of put this in perspective. 370,000 more cows through 10 months. That's probably going to be, I don't know, 425, 450 by end of the year. Okay, that's almost 1.5% of the cow herd right there. See what I'm doing? Okay, then I combine that with heifer retention. I'm pretty convinced that when the dust settles, the cow herd in 2023 will be about the same size that it was in 2015. Okay, a little bit bigger than 14, but about the same size it was in 2015. All right, so we're getting now to a cow herd size compared to what we saw. We had some really good calf prices 7, 8 years ago. Any questions?
That general trend line since 1976.
Yep.
It's been down.
Yep.
So is that because we've taken land out of production?
It's a hodgepodge of things. Is that part of it? Sure.
Because the farm programs got some hot and heavy about that time, were they?
I'm certain that's some of it. I blame it, though, more on two things. First of all, this is beef cow inventory, okay? And understand that we are a lot more productive now than we were then, right? So we can produce more beef on fewer cows now than in the 1970s, right? Okay, so that's number one. Secondly, frankly, we're just not consuming as much beef, right? Beef lost some market share in the 70s and 80s, mostly to chicken, right? And I think because of that, prices changed such that we just simply don't have as many cows out there. I get that question a lot about numbers. In all honesty, I didn't see a major change in pasture ground that I thought enough to actually impact beef numbers until the census of, I've got to stop and think, because every 5 years they do that, the census that came out in 2017. And that was the first time that I saw a major decrease in pasture acres nationwide. And I think a lot of it was because of pasture ground that went into row crop production, and it was that mid 14, 15, and so forth. No, exactly. 13, 14, 15, right? And it's one of those things, I mean, I can attest to this, right? In a lot of cases, those fences weren't in very good shape. You know what I mean? So on one hand, taking them up didn't have a big impact in the short run, right? But then you start thinking about putting them back, right? I've got to reestablish forage, reestablish fence. Yeah, I mean, then it's a whole nother ball game. So pasture ground goes into row crop production much easier than it comes back, right? So I think that's kind of the other piece of it. Good question. I'm not going to touch that. We're in a heavy grain area, and this ain't my first rodeo, all right? All right. Prices this year have been okay. I really thought early summer we had a good chance of our calf market holding at some very strong levels through the year. The continued drought has hurt. Spring board pulled back quite a bit, lost about 15 cents from the end of August to the 1st of October. And then the other thing that's hurt us is that a lot of what puts the underpinning on our fall calf markets is wheat grazing, right? A lot of our cattle go out west, go to the southern plains, think Texas, Oklahoma, southern part of Kansas, and put on wheat pasture. And you've got two things that can impact that. Certainly one is wheat price, right? The more valuable wheat is, the less likely folks are going to want to graze it. And then secondly, how much of it there is. And given how dry it's been in the southern plains, it's just not going to be a good wheat grazing year. And I think that's why we saw some pullback in prices thus far. Now, this is only the first 2 weeks of November, but we have added about 8 cents a pound to calf prices over the past 2 weeks. So that was encouraging to me. I think October's our bottom, but I was hoping that I was hoping we'd hold the 170s this fall. Heavy feeders have kind of been a bright spot. So right now they're averaging mid 160s for an 8-weight steer, but a lot of groups, if you kind of watch them, been in the 170s. So this seems to be falling as expected. We've seen fed cattle prices run up. Now we're seeing more on the heavy feeders. It's hard to build calf market momentum in the fall and winter. It always has been, right? But you put some green grass on the calf market come spring, it's going to take off. So I'm pretty optimistic about what I think we'll see in 2023.
So is there an opportunity to buy calves in the, late fall or winter?
Sure. And that's always there, right? A lot of folks are hesitant to do things like that in a year like this when feed prices are high. And I understand that completely. But my response has always been, don't just make the decision based on feed price. So I'm going to be in Bowling Green tomorrow talking about some backgrounding and backgrounding programs now, and looking at current calf price, expected feeder price in the spring and feed, for example. One scenario I'll show has me placing a 550-pound steer about now at $1.75, which I can do pretty easy, I think, easily, okay? I've got a spring board in the 180s. Even if I back off a basis, that's projecting a sale price for an 8-weight steer about $175 for spring. Now, that's unusual that I can buy a calf at $175 and then sell a feeder in the spring for $175, 300 pounds heavier. But in a high feed market, that happens sometimes. Plus, I've got seasonality working with me. And I was pricing feed. I had a simple ration. I was feeding gluten and soy hulls at $3.25 a ton, and then I had grass hay at $90 a ton. Okay, so just something like that. And I was squeezing about $120 profit per head doing that. So again, my only point is, understand that when feed prices are high, market dynamics change, right? Feedlots want to place heavier cattle when feed prices are high because they want more of those pounds on there already, right? So what that does is that narrows price slides, meaning the price discount as cattle get heavier, it gets smaller. The value of gain goes up. And I think right now, although feed prices are high, there is still incentive to add weight to cattle, my opinion. Any other questions? All right. So, I think you'll see a calf market come spring somewhere between 2014 and 15 levels. I think the state average price for a 550-pound steer will be something like $210 to $215. I think you'll see groups in the 220s. If you move heavier feeders, okay, I think you'll see the 180s in the winter and spring. I think you'll see the 190s by summer. So best prices we've seen there since definitely 2015, if I'm right. Okay. Questions?
One, don't want to deviate a whole lot.
Fire away.
Fat cattle is what, about 153 now?
Mm-hmm.
What's it doing in the grocery store? Is it plateauing off?
It's flat. It's flat.
How can it be?
So it's interesting the way this typically works. So you've always got margins, right? You've got margin between calves and margin between calves and fat cattle and wholesale and retail, right? And they tend to move here and there. Right now, that biggest margin differential is between the wholesale price and the retail price, right? The good news, though, in my opinion, is as calves get shorter and shorter, more and more that's going to flow back to the cow, calf, and feeder cattle level. So feedlots are getting more of it right now, and I think next year we'll get more of it ourselves, for what it's worth. I'll say this too, all right? That retail beef price series is not the best in the world, right? It's hard to get a good feel for retail beef price. Where it comes up a little bit short, it doesn't do a great job capturing featuring. So we might know something about retail beef prices on average. What we don't always know is how much more of it moves when it's on sale. I live in an area that's got a fairly competitive retail market. I've got a Kroger, a Walmart, and a Save-A-Lot within 5-10 miles of me or so. And I can find a really good buy on something every single day at the grocery store, right? So they really, in a lot of cases, retailers are using meat, and particularly beef, kind of as a loss leader. Like years ago, milk was in the back for a reason, right? Generate traffic. And I think they're using meat the same way sometimes now. So I think sometimes those retail beef series actually overstate the real price of what beef's moving for at the grocery stores. Kenny's opinion. Anything else? All right. So bottom line, from my perspective, fundamentals look pretty good, and I think we'll see a slower expansion this time. Costs are higher, you know that, right? It costs you probably $150 more to produce the same calf today that you produced in 2014-15. The other thing is, I think with that dry weather throughout much of the country, we're not going to be able to add heifers back like we would ordinarily. So I think that this stays a bit longer. Does anybody graze cattle through summer? Okay, that's fine. So usually high feed prices bode really well for stocker type operations because you get the value gain benefit and the very low cost of gain from grass. Okay, so walk through some general marketing stuff now. So we're going to talk about some market drivers, bad opportunities. I'm talking about lot size and then kind of long-term thinking. So walk with me through here. So the two main things that impact what feeder cattle sell for are fed cattle prices, what slaughter cattle are selling for, okay, number one, and then number two, feed prices, okay? Now, deferred live cattle futures are what really matters, right? It doesn't, if a 750-pound steer moves through the auction yard today, it doesn't amount to a hill of beans what a fed animal is selling for that same day, right? What matters is what the steer's likely to sell for 6 months from now when he comes off feed, okay? So in November, feedlots are looking at April and June live cattle futures to get an estimate for what they think those fat cattle will be worth when those feeder cattle today come off feed. Does that make sense? Okay. What we usually see is about a 1-to-1 relationship, but it's actually more like 1.1 to 1 or 1.2 to 1, meaning a $1 per hundredweight increase in what fed cattle are expected to be selling for usually adds about $1, $1.20 per hundredweight to what feeder cattle prices sell for here in Kentucky. So almost 1-to-1, all right? Now, corn price is a little bit different, and it varies by the market, okay? What we typically see in most normal corn markets, whatever normal is anymore, but something between 4 and 6, okay, is about a 4-to-1 relationship, meaning a $1 change in the price of corn per bushel is worth about $4 a hundredweight on feeder cattle price in the other direction. Okay, so if corn goes from $4 to $5, feeder cattle price drops by about $4 a hundredweight. Make sense? Now, calves tend to be more sensitive. So if it's 4-to-1 on heavy feeders, it's usually 6-to-1 or 8-to-1 on calves. Why are calves more sensitive than heavy feeders to changes in corn prices? They're lighter, takes a lot more corn to finish them. Okay? The exception, though, is in the spring when corn prices have almost no effect on calves at all, right? In the spring of the year, the corn market may not affect calves at all because it's simply not being driven by feed values, right? It's being driven by grass demand. So that's why spring is always so good to us in terms of calf markets here in Kentucky, because we're blessed with lots of ample forage. I pulled this down for you guys last night. So this is USDA's weekly market report. So this came out Monday afternoon, so I did this last night. But I'm just going to kind of make a few points here about the typical wean calf ranges. So 5 to 550, 550 to 6, and 6 to 650. So first things first, let's look at these price differences here. Quite a bit of cattle in here. So when you see the word value added by a market report, okay, that's the market reporter's way of saying those cattle were weaned and they had at least a round of shots. Okay, so not necessarily preconditioned CPH 45 type cattle, but at least weaned and vaccinated cattle. Okay, when you see nothing, that's kind of the nondescript cattle, not bad. Okay, but the reporters are basically saying there was nothing special about those cattle per se. And then you see just a few here that say unweaned. Now this is fairly new. I suspect a lot of these were also unweaned, but I think what this probably means is the reporter said these 3 calves didn't bring well at all because they must have been ball and green calves. That's my guess. Okay, so we're going to ignore those a little bit, but look here, 8-cent difference per pound in what those value-added cattle sold for versus those nondescript cattle. Okay, here's the same thing from a 550s to 600 pounders. again, I've got about a 6 cent difference here. Well, 5 cent difference here with what they sold for. And then here's the same thing. Oh, went the wrong direction. Same thing for my light sixes. Got about a 10 cent difference. Okay? Value is added to calves by weaning them and putting them through a health program. Okay? You can do it, or somebody else can do it, but understand there are folks whose business model is based around buying some calves that need attention and reselling them. Okay? Not only do you get the price benefit, there's additional pounds too. Okay, so health programs typically pay for in calf markets. I get this question a lot. Okay, bulls versus steers. One of the more common questions I'll get from somebody, they'll call me about half mad, and they'll ask me why bulls are outselling steers at blank market. Okay, we sell, thousands of cattle a week in Kentucky. It's inevitable on occasion a group of bulls will outsell a group of steers. Okay, what usually has happened when someone calls me mad about that is they've sold a group of steers, and sometime shortly after that group of steers they sold for, as they're waiting to get their check, what's happened? A group of bulls come through and sell some more. Sometimes it's a lot size thing. Sometimes it's a quality thing. Sometimes it's a buyer trying to fill out a load. Okay, but it does happen. But I went back and I pulled data for 10 years. So from January of 2012 to December of 2021, so the last full 10 years that I had, and I looked at every single monthly average for a 550-pound bull and a 550-pound steer. And I said, okay, what was the difference in price? There was not a single month out of those 120 months in that data set that the bulls outsold the steers on average. Okay? And on average, that differential was $11.66 per hundredweight, so almost 12 cents a pound. Okay? So that's a difference if the weight's the same at about $64 per pound. I'm so sorry, 64 bucks a head. Okay? Now, a wise person would say, well, Kenny, won't a bull outgain a steer? Won't a bull way more at weaning time than a steer? And he may well. So I like to kind of frame it this way. All right? First thing to understand is in a normal market, what is additional pounds actually worth? This is 10 years worth of data. Okay, so in other words, in the time period when I collected this data on steer and bull differentials, right, what was value gained? So if the average price for a 550-pound steer is $1.50, does that mean every pound that I add to that steer is worth $1.50? The answer is no, right? Why not? Because the heavier that steer gets, what happens? His price per pound goes down, okay? In most markets, 70 cents to $1 is a normal value of gain. Now, right now, value of gain's higher, right? But we're in an unusual market. But during this time period, most of the time, okay, it's something like 70 cents to $1. So another way to kind of frame this is, okay, how much more does that bull have to weigh to offset the impact of that price discount he's going to take on average? Does that make sense? In a dollar value gain market, that bull's got to weigh 65 pounds more, which means if that steer weighs 550, that bull's got to weigh 615 to bring the same amount of money per head as that steer. You follow me? All right? In an 80-cent value gain market, that bull's got to weigh 630. And that's a tall task. And again, unless you're in a market that sells and rewards you for selling natural cattle, implants are a really good way to get best of both worlds, right? Okay? There's good data to say that implanted steers will do as well as bulls, and I get the steer price too. Okay, so we move some cattle via natural market, so there's nothing wrong with that by all means. If you're getting paid for it, that's fine. But if you're not, folks, implants are to me, one of the easier return on investment things to kind of talk about in the cattle industry. Okay, I think they typically pay. All right. Any questions? One more of these. Did the exact same thing. This data series, though, didn't go back quite as far. But I wanted to try and get some sort of feel for, okay, how does muscling score impact value? Now, the way the graders tend to group our cattle up now in terms of reporting is they group medium and large frames together. Okay, so your medium and larger frame, not Holstein, native beef type cattle. okay? And they tend to put them in muscling score 1 and 2 and 2 and 3, okay? So you can kind of think about that difference being about a muscling score. But again, over this time period, which this one's actually only 9 years, okay? The difference, though, was about almost 15 cents a pound, okay? That difference is $82 a head. So if you've got cows or if you've got bulls that are throwing lighter muscled steers that are getting kind of pulled off by themselves, this can hit you pretty hard. And I think I've done a better job over my career talking about bulls and steers, not as much on this, but by all means, look for patterns. If you can track your calves back to a sire and a dam, look for patterns. This one can cost you pretty bad, right? You don't want small frames and you don't want light muscle calves. You can hammer pretty bad on those. Know the power of lot size. You all know this, I'm certain, but trade occurs in 50,000 pound quantities. The vast majority of our cattle are going to go out west to be put on feed somewhere, okay? And that truck is going to be full when it leaves this state. I use this in class a lot, but think about two groups of cattle, all right? They're identical. Lot A is 65 head of steers that weigh 750. They look exactly the same as Lot B, but it's 13 head of steers weighing the exact same thing. Lot A is almost 49,000 pounds. Lot B is just under 10,000 pounds. If a buyer buys Lot B, what does he or she have to do? I got to find 40,000 more head of cattle to match those, right? And there's a cost to doing that. So there's no question Lot A is worth more than Lot B. Now, I've used the heck out of this chart, but it's one of my favorites, all right? It looks at, okay, holding everything else constant, how much does lot size impact what cattle actually sell for in the state? So this is some data that we got from Bluegrass Stockyards from, I remember the years, I think it was 2006 or 7 to 2013. Preconditioned sales. Understand these are individual lots of cattle that sold, okay? A lot of them were singles, some were two, one group that sold through here was 350,000 pounds, 7 loads at one time, okay? We held a lot of things constant. We held constant the fed cattle market. We held constant the feed market. We held constant their weight, the kind of cattle they were, the month they sold. We held all those things constant. What I'm showing you right here is just two things, okay? X-axis is lot size. Mathematically, what's used here, this first circle is a single, and then we go by 5. So 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on. X-axis is just price differential, price benefit, okay, per hundredweight. So another way to look at it is, the average weight here was like 625. So this right here is roughly a truckload of feeder, of a truckload of calves, okay? This is a single, okay? So how much more per hundredweight did a truckload sell for than a single in this data set? About $21 a hundred, okay? That's believable, right? Watch a good uniform group of calves move through the ring, then watch a single run through and you'll see a big difference. Okay, so I can buy this number. Folks, the real story though is not on the extremes. The real story is right here, okay? Will a group of 5 outsell a single on average? The answer is yes, by about $11 a hundredweight. A group of 10 outsells a single by about $15 a hundredweight, okay? In fact, by the time I've got groups of 10, I've already captured 70, 75% of the price benefit associated with the truckload. And to me, that's the story, right? Not many of us are going to be moving truckloads of cattle. I hope you do. We don't. I hope you do. Folks, we can all find ways to get in this part of the world, right? Singles, 2s, 3s kill you. If you can just do things to get groups of 5 and 10, it gives the buyer so much more to work with. There are very few things you can do to add more value to calves than simply having them more uniform when they sell, right? Late calvers are a problem. Calves that don't match are a problem. Okay, so remember this all the time. If you can get here, wonderful, right? If you can just get here, though, all the difference in the world, right? A group of 10 versus a single, we're talking $75 a head. That's a big difference, real big difference. Know the
When you put groups of calves together and you want them to be uniform in size, what kind of range do you that group's fairly?
Good question. So if you're doing it on your own, it's up to you. I see a lot of groups sell with 7,500 pound spread. Now, when you go to the stockyards like most of us do, they kind of make that decision for you. And what they like to find is somewhere between 50 and 75 pound spread tops, right? They want them uniform. Here's the other thing though, Chris, to be aware of. It depends on how many there are too, right? If I've got a group of 8 calves in the ring, right? 75 pound difference is really going to stand out. Does that make sense? If I've got 50, it's a lot easier to kind of blend 75 pounds. So it's not a simple answer. But I think the answer is 50 to 75 is ideal. I don't see many move through internet sales with any more than about 100 or so. Question? We good? All right. This works both ways, okay? If you're someone that buys calves and sells heavier feeders like Chris talked about earlier, small groups can be a really good buy, right? And you can add value by simply grouping cattle into larger groups and adding weight to them. You can add value that way. In most markets, now it's different on the end of the state for sure, but in most markets up in my neck of the woods, I'll pay about half as much on commission as I will for a larger group than a smaller group. So sometimes you can get a good buy on calves that you buy as small groups, okay? I can add value selling them as larger groups and then save on commission at the same time. So another way to add value to calves. By all means, think about this when you're thinking about cows to cull. We always talk about culling the 3 O's, right? Open cows, old cows, and ornery cows. Those should still be at the top of the list, okay? But, you know, I really do like the idea of culling these late calvers. So for every cycle we miss getting the cow bred, we lose 21 days of age on the calf, right? At 2 pounds per day of age, that's going to be about 42 pounds or so of weaning weight. Okay, so we talk about how much less that calf is worth because it weighs less. Okay, but the other problem is if I've got a few of those straggler cows out there and I've got a smaller number of those lighter calves, not only do they weigh less, but what happens? They get sold in these smaller groups, right? So I'm convinced these later calving cows are also a problem for us. The other thing is you want to look for larger cows that wean a small percent of body weight. It's always been one of my fears. Folks that do a good job tracking their calves back to a dam, and it's great to do that. If I just make my culling decisions based on weaning weight, okay, and I'm consistently culling cows that wean me smaller and smaller calves, I've got to be careful that I'm not also culling my smaller cows, right? Because over time, my cows are going to get bigger if I'm doing that. So I like to try and think about, okay, not just what are my weaning weights, right? But how does that calf weaning weight compare to what the mature cow, what the size of that dam was? Some work that we did back several years ago, for every 100 pounds of mature cow size I'm maintaining, I need about 50 more pounds of weaned calf out of that cow to offset the additional cost. Okay, so the old adage is that she needs to wean about half her body weight is a pretty good rule of thumb at the margin. Okay, so look for larger cows that don't wean you proportionally larger calves. It's hard to get a mature weight on cows, all right? So the way I tell people, if you can't do that yourself, what I like to do is you'll typically get cull cow weights. When you sell cull cow weights, use that to try and calibrate your mind some, okay? Any questions?
Body weight on weaned calves very often?
Sure you do, but I'll say this. I'm convinced that in most cases, larger cows don't wean enough additional pounds to pay for their additional cost. There's exceptions, but I think that's your question really, right? The data, I don't remember the young woman's name, did an outstanding job. She shared a meta-analysis from some data out of multiple states. And what she found was, bottom line, was that larger cows on average did not wean anywhere near proportionally larger calves, right? So in all fairness, I could make an argument that the optimal cow size might be the smallest possible cow that throws me a medium or large frame calf, right?
So Leslie Henderson just did a talk at the grazing conference 3 weeks ago on cow size. It was called Right Sizing Your Cows. Very good talk, and that's available on the website.
Good deal. All right. I want to mention this briefly. So, anybody do any direct marketing, freezer beef, anything like that? Oh, good. Okay, so good. Demand has really grown here the last several years. So, truth be told, we were always short of local processing capacity in Kentucky, even pre-COVID. We really didn't. We never, I thought, had enough local processors to help us meet the need or the demand for local meats across the state. When COVID hit, what it really did, it sent a whole lot of consumers literally out searching for folks to buy meat directly from. And I would have bet money that 12 months later that would have pulled back some, and I don't know that it has. So we've added some more packing capacity, but this demand has been really, really strong. Do not discount this by any means. So we do some freezer beef ourselves. In fact, I enjoy doing this for a handful of reasons. Number one, on a per head basis, you can add a lot of value per head selling direct. Okay, a lot. Way better than anything else you might do. Now, it's quite a bit of work, frankly. And it's not so much the physical work as much as just the logistical stuff, right? Once a customer's established that buys a quarter or a half, it's pretty darn easy. Okay, get the check, tell them when to pick it up, or worst case, pick it up for them, right? It's the new customers that will drive you crazy in the beginning. You'll get asked all sorts of questions. You're fighting a lot of things from totally not understanding how meat works. Questions about how much freezer space. You know, some will think they can get half a steer in a simple refrigerator freezer combo, right? I'm serious. They will. You always ask the question. Make them go measure. We do some sorting ourselves, so we do a lot of halves, a lot of quarters. In unique cases, I'll break a quarter into an eighth or something like that, but kind of our system. But also, don't discount it even if you're a fairly large, traditional-oriented producer. So on smaller scale farms, it makes perfect sense because I can add a lot of value on a fairly small amount of head, right? So it makes perfect sense. But even if you're a larger producer that moves, groups of cattle, you're always going to have some that just simply don't fit with the load, right? Doesn't mean they're bad cattle, right? But think about a small frame steer that you simply can't put on the load with a group, right? Nothing wrong with him. He just simply doesn't match, right? Freezer beef, he may work just fine. So I can take some steers that would have taken a pretty serious discount at the stockyards and add a premium to them pretty easily. So look for ways to kind of add value to some of those that maybe wouldn't go as easily with the group. But this is enjoyable. The other reason why I like doing this, it is more profitable, but there's also no better way to learn about the quality of your cattle than actually see them in the freezer, right? So, I have learned a lot. So I grew up south of Lexington on a beef cattle and tobacco farm, okay? I was so feeder cattle oriented, it took me a long time to develop my eye for what a finished steer should look like. It's just not something that's kind of natural to us. So I've learned a lot there. We've learned about forages, for example, okay, and how that translates into what meat actually looks like hanging on the rail and in the cooler. So lots of advantages there that I've learned that I think are beneficial for most anybody.
So are you doing that with gluten hulls?
Forage. We do a forage finish program, which is unique. It takes longer, so you can do it much quicker on feed, but no. We finish cattle on forage. We focus on good quality forage, so we're constantly seeding, right? The base pasture has fescue, of course, but fescue orchard grass, but we're constantly seeding. We like Lespedeza, by the way. Lespedeza, red and white clover, some chicory. We've done some rye in the past, so we're constantly seeding. Our cattle, though, when they're ready for harvest, targeting a choice product, they'll be bare minimum 26 months of age, and we're pushing 30 oftentimes. It just simply takes longer.
So what about your fat?
Mm-hmm.
Are you seeing any yellowish?
It has a little different color to it. The way that I describe it is a little bit like if you don't like wild game, I think the forage finished beef has a little bit more of a wilder taste to it, a little gamier. Might just be in my head, but I don't mind it. Some people, though, don't care for it. I can't say I've noticed that yellow fat as much as some people talk about, but I've heard it before, and it looks a little bit different for sure.
What about their temperament?
What do you mean?
Do they have a tendency to be more high-headed because you're not feeding them grain, not dealing with them every day?
No, actually not at all. No. And we're moving them every 2 to 4 days, but no, they're easy to work with. In fact, they're pretty darn docile. They learn they're getting new pastures like getting fed. So it's now they're very, very docile. Now, if you weren't rotationally grazing them out there with them, I can see what you're saying, but no.
I see it loaded at a processing plant. They were wild as Martin hair.
We I think I got a picture here actually. So well, shoot, I don't.
While you're flipping back,
You're fine.
You get a little more premium on them because your clientele, I assume, are wanting the grass fed because it's natural organic.
Yeah.
Up in your price a little bit.
Yes. And we're not organic. We're not certified organic. A lot of what we do would kind of be in the same ballpark. We're not organic though. But we do. We're fairly small now, to be clear. We have some wholesale markets where we can kind of sell to kind of in volume. But on a per head basis, having those wholesale type markets allows us to do some freezer beef and move, 6 to 12 head a year at a really good premium because we know we can go somewhere with the ones that don't sell that. Does that make sense? So yeah, we move the wholesale type cattle on a carcass weight basis, and the freezer beef we sell in mostly sides and quarters. Yeah. So we actually, I don't have a picture, but we actually sort the cattle using polytape. We'll run lanes, work them in there, and we'll sort them in there and just put them back out. So the way we do it, we will have to go in and pull off 4 to 6 at a time to sell. So we have to find a way to kind of sort them there in the field and lay them to the front. So anyway, other questions? Don't discount it. It's a good market worth some consideration. We're fine. Last commercial. So in 2020, so I've always been someone that likes to run the roads and run my mouth. All right, that's what I do. In 2020, when we couldn't go out and do programming like this, I started doing a weekly market update, sent to the county agents, and I guess I wanted to make sure that you all knew that I was working for you when I wasn't on the roads, and so started doing that. As extension picked back up, as I got back in the classroom, things like that, we shifted this, and now I partner with 2 of my buddies, Josh Maples at Mississippi State and James Mitchell at University of Arkansas. So every 3rd week, one of us writes. So every 3rd week, I write a market update, but then every week you all can get something. Okay, so Josh wrote the one that came out yesterday. The way we do this is every week there'll be a price chart including Kentucky calves and feeders. There'll be a drought monitor. There'll be some other futures tables. And there'll usually be an article of some type. So for example, this one was, I guess, in February of last year that talked about kind of our perspectives on the revisions made to USDA's cattle numbers last year. Okay, Josh just wrote about cow and heifer slaughter. The reason I like to say this is because I'm in Kentucky, Josh is at Mississippi, and James is at Arkansas. This tends to be a little bit more cow, calf, and feeder cattle oriented than a lot of things that are out there. So we'll talk about fed cattle, we'll talk about cattle on feed, but we tend to focus more on cows and more on feeder cattle. So if you would like to get this comes out every Monday afternoon through MailChimp. Josh actually has the account, so the email actually comes from him. But usually sometime between 2 o'clock and 5 o'clock on Monday afternoon, that'll come out. So if you've got a phone that's nicer than mine, you can grab that QR code. If you can't read that, shoot me an email or reach out to your agent. I can get you on this list easily, but we would love to get you on there. So, has anybody seen this, by the way? Oh, good. Okay. I haven't.
Do you ever use options?
You're asking me personally? No. So back when we were more of a true traditional stocker operation, we did use some futures positions. Trying to think. So we did in 14, did in 15. It helped one year, hurt the other, right? But now the way we market cattle, it wouldn't make sense. So we don't. I really like, in fact, I actually think I skipped it due to time, but I really like this product. So LRP is Livestock Risk Protection Insurance. LRP is essentially a subsidized put option that you can scale. So whereas an actual put option, I've got to buy 50,000 pounds worth, I can buy LRP on, in theory, one head if I wanted to. But practically I can buy it on 10 or 20 head. The other thing is it's cheaper. So it's subsidized about 35%. So it's not perfect math, but in theory you'll pay about 2/3 for an LRP contract what you'd pay for a put option. So if you're big enough to use both, you may still want to use options, but on a pure cost basis, LRP is a pretty good opportunity. If you're interested, I've got a pretty good video on that I could send to you. I didn't cover mine, I apologize. We have used this PRF product for about 5 years now. Has anybody used pasture, rangeland, and forage insurance? Several years. How long have you used it? 3 or 4 years. We've done. I think this is either our 5th or we're going to have our 5th one next year. But it's not a perfect product, but it's subsidized pretty significantly. Okay. So year in, year out, it's about a 50% subsidy. So you should collect more than you would pay. What we have tended to do is cover. You have to cover at least 2 2-month periods. We have typically covered June, July, August, September. Now that didn't work out the best this year for us, right? But those are the months where typically are mostly worried about on rainfall and forage production. Other questions? Well, I have enjoyed talking with you. This is my contact info. Feel free to reach out to me. If you call me, leave me a message. I'm only in the office about half the time. Okay, I drive a lot. My email address, and if you're on Twitter, I'm at KY Cattle Econ. Any other questions? Thanks again for the invite. Good to see everybody.